Basically, the person who's speaking, which is most likely to be members of our Hermie team, will be on the screen. But if you have concerns with respect to privacy, please feel free to turn your camera off or change your screen names. This workshop will be available on the Hermie YouTube channel by next week. So if there is something that becomes too complicated, you can always go back to this and revisit the workshop. If you have any questions, we are going to have a question session at the end of the workshop, because there will be a lot of information and we actually want you to ask us as many questions as possible. And if you have any questions during the presentations while we are presenting, please put them in the chat box, as I mentioned to you. And if there are smaller clarifications, we can actually make them while we are presenting. Regarding language, although primarily the workshop is in English, if you're more comfortable using Hindi, Marathi, or Tamil, because those are the languages we speak here, so please do not hesitate to ask your questions in those languages. Hermie is trying to make sure that we reach out to as many people as possible in India. And that is the reason we are also trying to diversify our data in terms of languages. And the last point is you are requested to keep your audio muted until the question session so that we can run through the presentations quickly, and then we can go to a more interactive part where we can have conversations about how we measure human rights. So without any further ado, let's get into the workshop. So before we sort of go into the technical details of what we do about measuring human rights, there are a few things about the Human Rights Measurement Initiative, or as we call it, the Hermie, that you should know. First is that we use co-design for everything that we work on. It is important to us that the work we do or the data we produce is of use, is appropriate and relevant for the human rights practitioners community, as well as it's robust. So, when Hermie began its journey of trying to fill in the data gap and trying to measure human rights, sort of had co-design workshops with human rights defenders and human rights practitioners around the world, as well as the academic community, to ask them what sort of questions should we be asking to better fill in the information gap, how we present the data. So everything that we have here is using co-design. And I think that is the spirit with which we here at Hermie work. We're constantly trying to improve and be of more and more service to the human rights community that we are trying to work with. So if you have any feedback, any suggestions, we will be happy to take them on board. We'd love to hear them. If you can tell us what works for you, what does not work for you, and we're constantly trying to change and improve. As we saw, we are a diverse global team. We have team members across continents. Currently, we have Thalia and Yo-Yo in New Zealand. You have me and Vibha here. We have a fair share of team in the US as well. And it's a diverse team. We are a group of people who have a lawyers, we are lawyers, we are journalists, we are political scientists, we are economists. So it's a diverse team and a global team in true sense. So we're trying to be as representative as possible so that we understand the context in which our work will be used. The third most important thing is that the research that we do is peer reviewed. It is important to us that, as I mentioned, the work that we do, the data that we produce is not only relevant and appropriate, but it is absolutely credible. And that is the reason why most of our work is peer reviewed. We have had academics tell us that our methodologies and the data that we produce is both robust and reliable. So we wanted to make sure that this robust data is something that both human rights practitioners and the academic community can put to work in their respective fields. And lastly, and most importantly, we are completely independent. We are not associated with any government, and we are not for profit. The data that we produce is freely available on our rights tracker. So you don't have to subscribe to anything as such. Whatever data you want, you can readily access it on the rights tracker. It's open data. We're also not a part of the UN human rights system for NGOs. So technically, there is nobody who's telling us in terms of what we produce and how we produce it, except the constituents or the human rights community that we're trying to work for. So we do what we do because we believe what gets measured gets improved. I'd like to repeat, what gets measured gets improved. We, in our human rights advocacy, often see that human rights being termed as something so intangible and theoretical, it gets difficult to have persuasive and objective data to sort of draw attention to important issues that we know exist, but because they are not in a tangible form, in a quantitative form, uh, we often see that important issues sort of get pushed under the carpet. And that is what we believe in. What gets measured gets improved. If we wish to sort of bring about an improvement, we also need to measure it. That's the philosophy with which we work. To talk a little bit about Hermi, we currently measure 13 human rights in total. Our idea is to have a global expansion in terms of region, but also in terms of right. But currently, as we're starting out, we measure 13 rights, 5 out of which are economic and social rights, and 8 civil and political rights, which are further classified into physical integrity rights, that is safety from state, and empowerment rights, which is basically your freedom of speech, expression, association, and assembly, etc. Information about all of these rights is, as I mentioned, freely available on the rights tracker for a few countries. We also need you to know that we measure these rights based on completely different methodologies, and that's why this categorization of rights becomes very, very helpful. We'll first go ahead with the 5 economic, social, and cultural rights that Hermi works on. So we primarily work on the right to education, the right to food, the right to health, the right to housing, and right to work and livelihood. So one of the most unique things about Hermi is that, as we all know, economic and social rights are very difficult to measure because they are inherently linked to every country's income and available resources. So the obligation under international law for economic and social rights is progressive realization. And because it is so subjective, measuring progressive realization can be difficult. However, our team at Hermi uses something called as the SURF index, which takes a country's income and available resources into account and then looks at the performance. So what we basically do is we measure how a country at its current level of income is performing and whether it is actually fulfilling its obligations. And I think Thalia will speak more about this. We get our data with international databases. So all the international, so UN database or other databases on food security and other such important databases that provide you the index of how the country or where the country stands. I would also like to point out that these international databases often tell you the percentage of people who enjoy these rights in these countries. What Hermi data does is basically it assesses the performance of the country. So we are not trying to tell you how many people in India have an access to food, although you can have a look at few of the underlying values on our rights tracker. What we basically tell you is how your government is performing. And yeah, as I mentioned, we take the country's income into account. I will quickly move over to civil and political rights now. We measure 8 civil and political rights. And although there have been efforts to sort of measure civil and political rights because the obligation under international law is very clear, the obligation to protect and respect. But we are the first to sort of put a number or a quantitative assessment to measure the respect for these rights. And the methodology with which we measure civil and political rights is entirely different. It's a more resource intensive methodology because the methodology that we're talking about here is an expert survey. And I'm very happy to mention that this is the expert survey that we will be bringing to you all in India in 2022 for the very first time, so that all these 8 civil and political rights that Hermi measures, we also have information about India with respect to those rights. So we do this through a secure, anonymous online survey of in-country human rights experts like all of you. As of now, we have covered around 40 countries in the world with respect to conducting these surveys and producing this data. I think one of the biggest sort of things that we're going to do in 2022 is we're expanding to the 2 largest countries in the world. that is China and India. So we are hoping that by mid-2022, we have our rights tracker will have data on civil and political rights covering rights of people or respect for people's rights for over half the world. So what I'll do now is basically I will hand it over to Thalia, who will first run us all together through how we measure economic and social rights. And then we can go ahead with Vibha, who will talk about civil and political rights. So I will stop sharing my screen and over to you now, Thalia.
Thank you very much, Aditi. And hello again to everybody. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. So I'm now going to share my screen and show you a video that we produced that explains just briefly and with some animation to make it easier to follow how and why we measure economic and social rights. The video commentary is in English with Hindi subtitles. And we will also put the link to the video in the chat box and in the email that we send out to you later on. So you will be able to have another look for yourself. Just waiting for it to go full screen. There we go. And we'll begin.
Human rights release human potential. How do we tell if countries are respecting people's human rights and allowing them to flourish? If we want leaders to prioritize human rights, we need to measure them. What gets measured gets improved. Leaders of countries love numbers. What's GDP growth this quarter? How many people are out of a job? But do leaders have all the most important numbers? The Human Rights Measurement Initiative, HRMI, is filling a gap in the human rights ecosystem. We use award-winning and peer-reviewed methodologies to track the human rights performance of countries and publish scores each year on our rights tracker. We want countries to strive to climb to the top, to do their very best. We want leaders to call in their advisors and ask what they need to do to get their human rights scores up. But where is the top? When it comes to the rights to education, food, health, housing, and work, what target should a country aim for, especially when every country has a different level of income to spend? International human rights law says that every country needs to do their very best to devote their maximum available resources to improving their people's quality of life. This is called progressive realization. HRMI's scores are the first in the world to measure progressive realization, so countries at any level of income can know how well they're doing and have a realistic target to aim for, a goal they're capable of reaching. We discover the realistic target by finding out which countries have the best results at every level of income and comparing each country to that benchmark. We do it like this. Let's take the percentage of young people enrolled in secondary school in every country around the world. We take all the results for the last 20 years and plot them on this graph. Each dot is one country's result for 1 year. There's a big range. At any level of income, for rich countries and poor ones, there are some places that are setting the target, doing the best we've ever seen, and some that are a long way behind. How close to the target is a country getting? That's the HRMI score, given as a percentage of the target. Every country should be able to get near its 100% target. The lower the score, the more urgent the need for improvement. A low-income country getting 100% will most likely need more resources to improve its people's lives further. You can take these scores to government leaders. Show Guatemala's government that they are far behind other countries with the same level of wealth, even among their local neighbors. Show Malaysia that at their high level of income, they could achieve so much more. You can even combine our scores with population data to show, for instance, that if Guatemala went from its current score to the target of 100%, over 1 million extra young people would be in secondary school. Human rights release human potential and let people flourish. You can harness the power of HRMI's economic and social rights scores to fuel your country's climb to the top, its quest to be its very best. Go to rightstracker.org now.
So that's a short overview of how and why we measure human rights, economic and social rights the way we do. The video told me to go straight to rightstracker.org, so that's what I'm going to do. So here, all of our data are available at rightstracker.org in 5 languages so far, with more to come as funding allows. And you can look at different countries, you can look at different human rights, and you can look at different people groups. What most people do when they arrive is put their country name in. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to type India, and it will take us straight to the India page. On this front page, you see all of the scores that we have for India for up to 13 rights. And you'll see that there are some blank categories because so far we haven't run our expert survey in India. But this time next year, this will all be full of information, thanks to many people around the subcontinent, including many of you here today, probably. But what I'm going to look at right now are the data on economic and social rights, which we do have for India for right now. And so you can use these in your work without waiting. Here are the 5 scores for the rights to education, food, health, housing, and work. And they're expressed as percentages. They're percentages of the target that is set by our methodology. And that target is what we calculate should be possible at this country's level of income, GDP per capita. So we have compared every country's performance on indicators contributing to these rights. And we've seen what's possible at the same kind of GDP per capita as here, India. And we've seen that countries with the same level of income as India are able to do much more. They are able to do this level where the 100% mark is. So the 100% mark kind of represents the best that we've seen in the world over the last 20 years at this level of income for countries that have a similar level of income to India. Now, you'll see that the score for the right to education says 79%. And for those of you who remember your school days, 79% is a very respectable score for most of us on a test. But these are not test scores. This is the percentage of completing the task of meeting India's human rights duty. So it's and you'll see here we've given a little indicator where it says bad for this range and fair and good if you're right up the end. And so these 2 scores for education and health, those scores fall into the bad range, and the other 3 fall into the very bad range. So 79% may sound good. We've clearly labelled it here as being not great, because if you imagine, I don't know, some of you may have children at home who you ask to do jobs around the house. I certainly do. And if I asked my son to sweep and vacuum our house, and he came back and told me that he had done 79% of the sweeping and vacuuming, I would not be very pleased, because I asked him to do a task and he hasn't completed it. And that's what's happening here. India, like almost every other country in the world, has signed up to say that they will do their very best to devote their maximum available resources to progressive realisation of the right to education, among others. And what India is achieving right now in terms of getting kids into school is 79% of what it could be doing right now at its level of income. And so this is the kind of information that people in civil society can be publicising and reporting on and taking to leaders, to decision makers, to government policy makers and elected members, to say there is room for improvement. Even within our current resource constraints, we should be doing better. And you all will be the people who will know exactly what could be done better. We're not here to tell you which policies need to change or which budgetary lines need to be increased. So those details are down to all of you. But we can tell you that India could be expected to be achieving much better right now with its level of income, judged just on its current level of resources. Now we have a little bit more information, quite a lot more information in fact. If we go to the quality of life tab here, we see the same graph here. And because we have scores for all 5 rights for India, we can give a composite score here. The quality of life score is 64.2 for India. And so if you wanted just one number that you wanted to publicise or report on or take to leaders, then that would be that's a representative number, and that falls in the very bad range. We then have more information here. Some of what I've just explained is written in auto-generated sentences here. And so you could, for instance, cut and paste this paragraph and put it into one of your reports to explain the significance of the numbers if you were writing something and submitting to a treaty body, for instance. Each of our economic and social rights, the 5 big rights that we mention, we further break down. And so, for instance, for education, we can also give you a score for India for the right to primary education and the right to secondary education. So these are Hermes scores, the ones that are talking about how complete the task is, how close to the target India is reaching. These are scores that judge government performance. So these are not the enrolment rates, for instance, of the number of children that are in school, but we can show you that as well. So these 2 buttons, if you switch between them, at the moment we're looking at the Hermes scores, but if you switch to indicated values, you see the actual numbers, you see the enrolment rate. So the last time it was measured, 92.3% of eligible school-aged primary children were enrolled in school. That's a reasonable number. But when we overlay the expectation given the resources, so we turn it into a Hermes score, the score for the government is 88.2%, which goes into the fair range. You can look at the subcomponents of each of these rights by just clicking one of these. As we go further down, there are a few rights, depending on what information is available in the international databases, where we can give you sex disaggregation. So if you are reporting on gender and you're interested in how India is performing for girls or for boys or for men or for women, you can look at these data here. For the right to education, these are Hermes scores that judge the government performance. So again, this is the government score for girls, which is generated by looking at how girls are achieving around the world, and the government score for education for boys. One of the most useful features, I think, depending on what you are doing with the data, is this over time graph. So for each of our rights, you can see the scores over time, how they may have shifted. And what I really like about this is that this often can tell some good news stories. Our data, we try to give all the data, the good news and the bad news. And often the good news is found here when you see this kind of trajectory. Now, certainly the current score for the right to housing of 60.9 is a score that falls, sadly, in the very bad range. It means that clearly there is more that India could be doing to make sure that people enjoy an adequate standard of housing. But on the other hand, it's been steadily rising for over a decade. And so that is encouraging. I think that this is true in most places of the world, that leaders do like to hear good news as well as the criticism that we are inevitably sending towards them. And so you may find it diplomatic to point out some of the progress that has been made and to encourage and praise the progress that you see. And you can also look at, for instance, the right to housing. You see this is the trajectory. And if we look at the subcomponents, the right to water, that has it's rising rather less steeply. And it turns out that improvements in the right to basic sanitation are driving that line going up. And so this would be something to draw attention to as where there has been significant success and improvement over time. Those of you who have followed all of that and enjoyed seeing all of those numbers and see that there are things that you can use, let me draw your attention to more things that you can use. Those of you who have found this interesting but quite overwhelming, then you don't need to listen to the next 2 minutes. So the numbers that we give you on this page, on the quality of life page, these are the default scores that are most useful for all purposes. But if you want to dig into the data a little further, everything else that you could find is under this switch view button. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all of the options here, but I want to make sure you all know it's there. So if you go switch view, there are two different toggles that you can do to show different data. So the first one I'll show you is this low and middle income versus high income assessment standard. Now, we take data on all sorts of things from international databases. Some of the information that we take is more suitable to high income countries or more available in high income countries. And so, for instance, when we look at education, we also have a measure of quality of education based on the PISA scores, international tests that are carried out in a lot of different countries. It's mostly high-income countries that use the PISA scores, but any country that uses them, we will take that data and produce a Hermes score for quality education. And so if India were a country that used PISA scores, despite being by default in the low and middle income category, you could switch to high income and you could see the extra data. In this case, education is not something you'll get extra information on, but for instance, health is. So if we go down to this section and we choose health, we're going to see a different set of indicators. So we have slightly different ways of measuring adult health and child health. And so if you are honing in on child health indicators or adult health indicators, then you might want to see how they look under the high income assessment standard and how they look under the low income assessment standard, just to give a bit of nuance. The other thing that you might want to look at, and it's most useful in very low income countries. So countries that are significantly less wealthy than India, this is more useful. But I will show you here, this dotted line here at 100%, this is the income adjusted performance benchmark, where we are judging India by its peers in terms of income, GDP per capita. But we can also show you how India performs compared to the whole world, the richest countries as well. So if we switch there to global best, India's scores go down slightly because they're now competing against the best in the world, not just the best at this income level. So the income level dots have just moved a bit, so you can still see how far away India's scores are from its income target. And then you can see that in order to get into the good category, you'd have to do better than anyone has ever done at this income level, India would. And so that tells us that in order for India to get into the truly good category compared to the rest of the world, India will need more resources. So the best performing countries will need more resources to improve if they're not very high income countries. So that's the income adjusted and global best indicators. We have more information about this on our website and also in an explainer video. And so we will send you links to those if you'd like to review that information a bit more slowly and in a bit more detail. But I think that's all I'll show you for the moment. And I'm going to pass over to Aditi to speak a little bit about another way that you can view the data. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to you, Aditi.
Thank you, Thalia. That was really great. So I think taking over from Thalia, one of the best things about Hermes scores, as a human rights practitioner, what I found when I first looked at the rights tracker was that basically we are not just putting a number or giving countries a score, but the fact that the score that we give is comparable between countries and over time. And you can also have a look at the rights tracker which can give you this comparable score. I will share my screen to show you how that can be done. I hope you can see my screen now. When you go to the rights tracker, you will see a rights drop-down option here. If you want to see a comparative data on all the countries or on a set of countries or with respect to a certain right, you can click on this drop-down option and you can look for it based on a right or an indicator. So as you see here, you have categories of rights, you have a comparative data on all the rights or specific rights and their subcategories or subcomponents as well. Because Thalia spoke about the right to education, we'll continue with that as an example. So I will click on the right to education here. And as we click on it, we'll see that a score pops up for 162 countries for all of whom we have data. And this data that we have, which is a comparative score of performance of all these countries, is based on the low and middle income assessment standard. So typically what happens is that the income assessment standards are based on indicator values that are not only most appropriate and relevant, but also that are most readily available for low and middle income countries. So what happens is that in addition to low and middle income countries, many of the high income countries also have this data. So what we do is that the data that is available for every country, we take it into account in order to give a score. So in addition to, so although the assessment standard is for low and middle income countries, you will see here that in addition to the low and middle income countries, you have several other high income countries like Canada, Singapore, Sweden, United Kingdom, Norway, New Zealand, etc. However, what you can do is if you just want to find out about how low and middle income countries are performing with respect to the right to education, you can further cull down this list and you can have a comparative list just for the low and middle income countries, which you can do through the country filter here. If you click on this, you will see that you're able to sort countries based on region, based on sub-region, based on their income group, which is currently relevant to the example we're looking at, by country groupings, or by ratification of certain human rights treaties. So because we want to take out the high income countries from this list or separate the low and middle income countries, we will click on low and middle income here. And we will see that the high income countries have now been removed from this list. And now what you see is the low and middle income countries and how they're performing. We see that Burundi covers, it like reaches its full 100% as compared to its income levels. Similarly, we see the score for Tajikistan, Malawi, and this is how we go. We see India is way below here somewhere, right here at the 79% score that we looked at. I'm going to remove this filter. So basically, when we look at this, now we can say that Burundi has done the best of what it can with its limited resources and income. It's a small country with limited income, but it has done everything it can to optimally utilize its resources to gain the benchmark of what we calculate is possible at its level of income. So here we can say that Burundi sort of has managed to fulfill its obligation of progressively realizing the right to education. However, does it mean that Burundi's performance is the best in the world and there is not much that it can do? In order to see that, we can switch view, and this is a very helpful option, as Thalia pointed out to you, and we can look at the global best benchmark. Now, when the performance benchmark is shifted to global best, Burundi will be comparing to the most high income countries in the world. And this performance benchmark does not take into account the constraints that are posed by income and resources. And now we see that Burundi, which was on top of the list, goes way below here somewhere. And the simple reason for that is that although Burundi is performing its very best at its level of income, and is fulfilling its obligation, its raw score or the total score is still very much less as compared to high income countries. And it is understood that you can't expect countries of different income levels to sort of adhere to or like fulfill these rights on the same level. Now we can see that Canada here with its score of 99.6% is on top of this list. So here we can basically say that Canada is currently leading the world in terms of how the government is performing in order to ensure that the right to education is realized for the people of Canada. We also have the list here. So now I am going to switch back to the income adjusted performance benchmark. One thing I would like to point out here is that when you switch view, these toggles we don't have a default setting as such, and you have to manually change back the performance benchmark to income adjusted or low income, high income assessment standards. Because if I leave this on, what I will see is the global best standards only. I will not see the income adjusted thing, which is currently more relevant for us. So just a reminder, because I forget it often too, is that you have to by yourself manually go and switch back the performance benchmark from global best to income adjusted in order to take income into account. We will also see how these scores look based on different assessment standards. So as we see here, it's based on low and middle income assessment standard. The underlying values for the low and middle income and the high income assessment standards are slightly different. So when I click on high income, we see when we go back to the comparative list of scores, we see that we have scores only for 71 countries. This means that the indicators that we use to basically measure scores on the high income assessment standard are available only for these 71 countries. So what we tend to see here usually is that the countries that are here are mostly countries with a very high income level, but there are also other mid income countries who may have scores or indicator values that can be useful to assess their performance on the high income assessment standard. So for example, when it comes to the right to education, there are other middle income countries like Romania or Jordan or Georgia that do administer the PISA tests. Therefore, in addition to secondary education, the right to secondary education, they also have tests that look at the quality of education value, and therefore they are included in this list for the high income assessment standard. Reminding you again to switch view. Even when we do this, we can basically see that this list is very long. And now because this workshop is specifically dedicated to India and South Asia expansion, we can further shorten this list in terms of the right to education, in terms of the comparative data for countries that we're looking at. And then for that purpose, this use country filter is extremely useful because this is a workshop primarily for South Asia. We will click on South Asia, and this filter will then separate out the countries in South Asia, and you'll be able to see the comparative scores of all the South Asian countries here. Most of our South Asian countries fall within our low and middle income group. So this is an income adjusted score. We can see here that India at its 79%, as we saw when it comes to the right to education. We see that Sri Lanka is at 95.5%, Nepal is at 83.5%, Bangladesh is at 82.5%. These are all income adjusted scores. Therefore, this is the performance of the country based on how much it can do at its current level of income. You know, we generally see that countries like to compete often with their neighbors in terms of development and other things, especially in the context of India. Our comparative standards are often that to our neighboring countries. So this could possibly be a useful resource for advocacy, for you to go back and tell the leaders in India that, you know what, India is not performing as better as its neighboring countries such as Sri Lanka, Nepal, or Bangladesh at the income adjusted level. And there is a lot of scope for improvement. So basically, this is the comparative data. Now, if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you can see here that there are further more options. These are also filters that you see here, but these are filters to basically look at the comparative data from the point of view of the individual component of the right. For example, we will see the right to primary education in all these countries, and I will click on it. When we go, we see the fulfillment of the right to primary education of all these countries, and the scores here will then differ. We'll see how all these countries are performing. So, you know, if you want to sort of look at specific components of the right, you can look at the right side of your screen, and you can also find details based on these individual components. Now, for either of these countries, the higher income assessment standard scores will not be available because none of these countries administer the PISA test. So these two would be most relevant. And you can play around with this in terms of which right and which countries you want to compare with. When you want to go back to the main right to education, when you want to go to the main rights to education page, you remove the South Asia filter. And you basically see that you go back to all the countries. Using this country filter, you can also, for example, look at the information on Middle East. You can also add the country filter of low and middle income. So these are the low and middle income countries from the Middle East. So this is the way in which you can filter out and find comparative score for the most relevant data for your advocacy. I will stop sharing the screen. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, do feel free to put them in the chat. And now what we will do is just before we take a quick break, a stretching break, because we know this is heavy on information, I will pass it over to Vibha, who will basically now share a video on our methodology for how we calculate or measure civil and political rights. And later on, will run us through the CPR data, that is civil and political rights data on our rights tracker. Since India's survey is only going to happen next year, and hopefully by this time next year, not hopefully, we will have the data by this time next year in terms of India. But for now, we have the scores on Nepal. So we would want to give you an example of how the India scores will look based on the survey. So over to you, Vibha.
Thank you, Aditi, and thank you, Talia. What I will do is to share my screen now, and we'll play a brief video that explains why and how we measure civil and political rights. In the meantime, please do check out the chat where Talia has posted links to resources that you might find useful. And as far as the questions are concerned, we'll either answer them in the chat or at the end of the presentation as well. This is a short video where we have the video in English, but the subtitles are in Hindi.
Keep people safe and let them flourish. How do we tell if all countries are respecting people's rights and allowing them to flourish? If we want leaders to prioritize human rights, we need to measure them. What gets measured gets improved. Leaders of countries love numbers. What's GDP growth this quarter? How many people have jobs? The Human Rights Measurement Initiative, HRMI, is filling a gap in the human rights ecosystem. We use robust and peer-reviewed methodologies to track the human rights performance of countries and publish scores each year on our rights tracker. We are shining a light on human rights. We want countries to care so much about human rights that leaders call in their advisors and ask what they need to do to get their scores up. Civil and political rights, like voting rights, free speech, and freedom from torture and ill treatment, haven't been measured comprehensively until now, partly because it's unpopular with governments, and partly because of the desk drawer problem. People with accurate knowledge about, say, how many people were tortured last year often have bulging desk drawers, but lots of the cases they know about don't end up being published or counted. Maybe there isn't enough funding, or their organization has different priorities right now. So we go straight to those local experts in each country, and we ask them about the rights we measure, given all the information in their desk drawers. We want to produce reliable scores that are comparable between different people across different countries over time. So we use a carefully designed, anonymous, and secure online questionnaire to find out what's really going on in each country. We ask about what people have observed in their country and also about fictional countries, so we can place everyone's answers on the same scale. Then we act as a megaphone, amplifying the voices of all of those local researchers, campaigners, human rights lawyers, and journalists. Our megaphone turns their combined desk drawer knowledge into scores out of 10 for each country, displayed and freely available to the worldonrightstracker.org. We display scores with uncertainty bands. The narrower the band, the more certain we are of the score. We also ask everyone which kinds of people are at extra risk of having their rights violated. So you can search the rights tracker to explore the human rights situation for, say, refugees, or women and girls, or journalists, or people who are homeless. Please use your country's scores to advocate for the changes you want. Show your leaders the numbers and where they need to improve. Congratulate them when you see the scores go up. We publish annual updates each year, usually in June. Go to rightstracker.org to see how your country is doing. You can also get in touch if you want us to bring the survey to your country, or if you can help fund us to keep producing these data and expand our coverage. In today's world, change needs numbers, and we are producing them, because human rights keep people safe and let them flourish. The Human Rights Measurement Initiative, measuring what matters.
I'll stop sharing now, and to explain how to read our data, I will share my screen, and for a South Asian country that we have CPR data for Nepal, with the help of Nepal, I will explain how we can read these data. Similar to how both Aditi and Talia pointed out, in the rights tracker, if we look for countries, we can find different countries. And here I've clicked on Nepal. So in the at a glance page, what we have is a rough summary of all the scores for different rights. For civil and political rights, we have two categories. First is the safety from state rights, under which we measure 5 different rights, say right to freedom from arbitrary arrest, forced disappearance, death penalty, extrajudicial execution, and torture and ill treatment. What we have here is the mean scores out of 10. As already pointed out, we use an anonymous survey to calculate, to ask for responses, and based on that, we will calculate these scores out of 10. And then we move on to empowerment, which is the second category, under which we have 3 different rights, which is right to assembly and association, opinion and expression, and participate in government. And these are the mean scores for each of these rights. If we move under the particular tab, say for safety from state, what we'll be able to see is, we saw the mean scores in the at a glance page, but here we see indicated in terms of uncertainty bands. We use uncertainty bands to be most accurate and transparent in our data. And what this shows is, for a particular right, say for arbitrary arrest, while the mean score is 4.2, it falls within the band of 3.6 and 4.9. And similar to economic and social rights, as pointed out by Talia, we have different ranges available, which is the very bad, the bad, fair, and the good range. And in the side of the rights tracker itself, we do have some explanation about what these bands mean. And we have links further that will explain these bands. Now, if we click on a particular right, say right to freedom from arbitrary arrest, what we'll be able to see is how this human right has been defined. And this is available for each of these rights. Moving on, once we scroll below, we will be able to see the overtime time trends. And as already pointed out by Talia, similar to the economic and social rights, we have a depiction of how this right has been maintained by the government over a period of years, say from 2017 to 2020, what has been the case in Nepal. And this is available for each of these rights as well. Further, when we scroll below, we also ask our respondents which particular people are at risk of having these rights violated. And in this column, we can pick the right that we want to choose. If we have to pick right to freedom from extrajudicial execution, we'll have some word clouds that will be highlighted. And what these mean is that these many percentage of our experts, human rights experts in Nepal, have identified that members of labor unions and union rights advocates are at risk of having their right violated. Now, we do see that some of these word clouds are bigger than the rest. However, this does not mean that a particular group is more at risk when compared to the other. It just means that more of our experts have indicated that these groups are at risk. We also have some additional information that our respondents have provided and that we have summarized in our own words for each of these rights. Now, similar to these, we move on to the empowerment rights, under which we measure 3 different rights. And similar to that, we have the mean scores and the uncertainty bands within which they follow. And if we click on it, we can see the definitions in the right side as well. And we have summary scores for all three of these rights. And similar to safety from state rights, we have the overtime depiction from 2017 to 2020. And we also have these word clouds that will give us more information about the people at risk. Now, if we want to look at all the people at risk, we have a collective column here where we have collated all the different word clouds and have put it together. One advantage is we can highlight a particular group of people that we're looking at. Say, for example, we're looking at indigenous people. Then what happens is we have all three different types of rights. So we have both the economic and social rights, as well as the two categories of civil and political rights. Indigenous, all our experts have identified indigenous people of being at risk of having a particular right violated. Their word cloud here is highlighted. So we see this for right to education, where 38% of our human rights experts have identified them as being at risk. And then if we scroll down, we'll have the same for right to food. And the more and more we scroll, we'll see it for different rights. So for example, we'll have the safety from state rights. And then further, we'll have the empowerment rights as well. And again, similar to what we saw earlier, if we click on this tab, then we'll have more information as to what the respondents have indicated. This is primarily our CPR data. And similar to what Aditi showed us for the ESR data, you can compare it between different countries and regions as well. I will stop sharing right now and pass it on to Aditi, but please ask any questions you have in the chat or once we're finished with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vibha. Just to answer one question with respect to, I think Paul sir has asked it in chat in terms of whether the ESR details for separate categories of people are available. What we would like to highlight is that the people at risk section that we have is also available for ESRs, but that is only available through the survey, expert survey that we will be sharing. So in the expert survey, although it is primarily for civil and political rights, the expert survey will ask you a few questions about economic and social rights in terms of which are the groups of people who are at risk of having those particular rights violated. And depending on what our survey respondents identify as being the groups whose rights, particular rights are violated, as Vibha showed you, will have them available in the word clouds. But that will only happen after we have our survey responses, because those disaggregated data is primarily based on our survey, the survey response that we get from human rights experts like all of you, because you have a better understanding of how the right is being implemented at the grassroots. So thank you, Vibha, for that wonderful presentation. I will share my screen again. We have just a few more things to add to it. So please do go on the rightstracker.org after this workshop to see if you can find any rights or comparative data or any numbers that you think are useful for your advocacy, your policy purposes, for your work, for your research. Now, basically what we will be doing is we will be identifying how Hermi data has been used and who are the people who have found our data to be useful. So I will pass it on to Thalia to share with us who all are the people who have used Hermi data and for what all purposes. So over to you, Thalia.
Thank you, Aditi, and thank you also to the many people who are putting in useful questions in the chat box. I do encourage everybody to read those conversations. So Aditi and I have been giving some brief answers so that they're at least addressed as soon as they're asked, and then we will have time for questions shortly also. So if our short answers haven't answered your question thoroughly enough, then we would love to hear that shortly. So just briefly, some thoughts about how you might be able to use our data, and actually we would love to hear your thoughts about how you might be able to use our data, because we are not the authorities on it. But just to give you some examples of how we have seen it used by people already. So the one major group obviously is civil society, and I think many of you here today are from that kind of world. You can use our data when you are trying to influence decision makers, to hold governments to account, to show that improvements could be made, and to refute claims that that improvements can't be made because we can't afford it. You can also use the data in reporting if you're doing shadow reports or submissions in United Nations processes, for instance. You can use our data just as an extra piece of the puzzle. You could also use it in strategic planning. As you look through the data, there may be things that occur to you that are things that that might become priorities for your organisation, depending on what's showing up, what people are, what information people are giving. Governments, we certainly hope that governments will use the data. We want to see a day where government ministers call their experts in and say, how do we get our Hermes scores to increase? What do we need to do to get a better score for freedom of speech or a better score for the right to health? We want governments to see our numbers and be spurred to positive action. We know that governments do use it in policy making. We also know that governments use it in diplomacy when they are researching other countries. The media can use our data if you're working in the press. Often our data might be just one line in a story, giving big picture context to a specific thing that's happening. But the data can also give story ideas for investigative journalists. You can see the data and say, well, I think I need to put that to somebody and get a response. And then if we go to the next slide, Aditi, thank you for running this across halfway across the world. National human rights institutions, NHRIs, are using our data. And I, in a response to something that Paul was asking, I've put a link to a report that we recently wrote for the New Zealand Human Rights Commission. They commissioned us to do a report into the rights to health and housing in New Zealand. United Nations treaty bodies and special procedures. We have several examples of those groups using our data. Other multilateral organisations like the World Bank use our data. The private sector is something that we're focusing on a little more at the moment. When companies are needing to report on their on the environmental impacts, the social and governance impacts of what they're doing and of the countries that they are working in. If they're looking to be ethical investors, then our data can be useful. And certainly all kinds of researchers, academics and students are using our data. I have just a few examples on the next slide, and we actually have a section called Data in Action on our main website, humanrightsmeasurement.org, and we'll put the link in the chat box. And it has dozens of examples that we have seen. There will be many examples of people using our data that we don't know about because, why would they let us know? And a lot of work will be done behind closed doors or in private. But some that we have seen, for instance, the Ontario Human Rights Commission was talking about how in the COVID recovery that using our ESR data, our economics and social rights data, will be useful. The Hong Kong Free Press was one media outlet that reported on our new data in the middle of this year. Also, the next bullet point is two press organisations in Malaysia. The Kathmandu Post also in Nepal. Cultural Survival, some of you will know as an NGO that works around the world on Indigenous rights, and they have started using our data routinely in their Universal Periodic Review submissions. And the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany has told us that they're using our data internally in their discussions. So there are many more examples, and as I say, I'd love to hear from you what you think the data would be useful in your work, and if you do end up using it in any tangible way, please do let us know. We are always interested. The next thing I'd just like to show you in terms of usefulness, which is one of our key aims, is that all of our data is available on the Rights Tracker, and you can also download a PDF of the main headings of the country information. So for instance, if you go to the India page, there's the button that says download PDF. And when you click that, you'll get a sort of nicely designed and formatted presentation. It's just a couple of pages. And so you can include this if you're working with treaty bodies or in the Universal Periodic Review. This could be an annex, this PDF, and you could just circulate it before a meeting. You could bring it as a fact sheet to pass around if you are meeting with people. Speaking of the Universal Periodic Review, we have been delighted to see organisations using our data. We have worked quite closely with the organisation UPR Info, which many of you will know is based in Geneva. It's an NGO that's dedicated to helping civil society to engage in the UPR process. So they are, they have real expertise in how to navigate the UPR process, and according to them and their advice, these are some of the ways that using our data is appropriate in a UPR submission. So our data can complement your findings. So you will be providing, the vast bulk of your submission will be things that you know personally in your work, in your area of expertise. But our data can complement that. And so you say, here are these situations of violations that we are reporting on, and then you can add in, and Hermy says that the score overall for this country is this, showing that this is a systemic problem, not just that what we are reporting on has a broader context. So our scores can provide high level context for the detailed information that you're giving. Our scores can reinforce the messages that you are giving. You are saying X and Y and Z are important and should be taken up at UPR review, and an international data organisation backs this up, reinforces what we're saying. Fourthly, using our data can show that your findings are part of a wider trend. And fifthly, UPR Info says that including our data in your UPR submission does make your submission more persuasive, more likely to rise to the next stage as United Nations officials summarise the data for the UPR process. So there are several good reasons that you might want to just add one sentence from our data. Also, sustainable development goals. I know many of you will be working on the SDGs and perhaps participating in the high-level political forum on SDG progress. Our indicators do line up with the SDGs, and Vibha is putting in the chat box a link where we have a table to show which SDG indicators line up with which Hermy indicators, so that you'll be able to connect them. And crucially, of course, you will have all sorts of data already on the SDGs, but crucially, the difference with us is that our data takes income into account. For most of the SDGs, it's the economic and social rights data that's useful. And so you are able to say what progress ought to be made, and where progress should be, things should be getting better more steeply. The over time graph is particularly useful, I think, when you're looking at sustainable development goals, because progress over time is important. And for countries that participate in the survey, so Nepal and South Asia this year, or for the last several years, and India as of next year, you can use the people at risk information to highlight gender inequities, for instance, and the position of other vulnerable groups. Just a quick word on gender. If gender is something that you are particularly focused on, there are 3 specific places that you might want to go and you may not think to otherwise. So we have those disaggregated set by sex data for the rights to education, food and health. So you can have a look at that, even if those are not your main areas. If you're looking at gender, you may want to see how well the government is performing for girls or for women. For survey countries, which again will include India next year, we note where women and girls are at particular risk of rights violations, and there'll be other categories that overlap with that, for instance, children. And we also measure reproductive health, and that's one of the components of the right to health that we provide a Hermy score for, and so that might be relevant to your work as well. And now I'll hand back to Aditi. And I will return to the chat box and catch up. I see that there's been lots going on while I've been talking.
Thank you so much, Dalia, for all that information. Just before I go ahead with what Hermy can do to help your work, or how we would like to see our data support your work, I'd like to just add to something what Thalia said in terms of the gender disaggregated data. It is important to understand how to read the data on the rights tracker. So on the rights tracker, because our rights tracker is so interactive, we often have a thing that we say that if you have a question about the rights tracker, just click on it and you'll mostly find an answer or an explanation of how to read the data as well. So to read the gender disaggregated data, I would just like to point out that the numbers that you see are not comparative scores between males and females or girls and boys, but they are comparisons of how your government is performing for girls as compared to how governments of other countries at the same income level are performing for the girls, depending on your performance benchmark. So make sure that when you're looking at the gender disaggregated data, you do click on the how to read button on our rights tracker so that you know what you're reading and there are no sort of miscommunication in terms of how the data is read. I will now go to tell you how Hermi can do to what Hermi can do to help your work or how we would like our data to be of use. So first, we can run a workshop with your organization tailored for the work that you do. Currently on India, like we said, we are waiting for us to get the survey scores, and we would really urge all of you to spread the word about this. Basically, the survey information will give us a lot of other information. We can run a workshop with your organization tailoring to certain rights. We can also, as Thalia mentioned, help you use our data in your own submissions or reports, be it shadow reports for treaty bodies or your UPR stakeholder reports, which would be, I believe, for those of you who are submitting it, is due sometime in March of 2022. Similarly, HLPF submissions that happen every year. We'd be very happy to show you how and where you can accommodate our data. If you have any comments, questions, we are very happy to hear from you. So do get back to us. You can email us anytime. My email ID is here. Thalia's email ID is here. We'll also put it in the chat. So do reach out to us with any questions or comments that you may have. I'd also like to basically point out to you how we can collaborate or what you can do to partner with us. So basically funding. The idea is that we are planning to expand a survey to different countries. And as we mentioned, the survey is a very resource intensive process, and we require support in order to ensure that we can successfully expand the survey to your country. So if you find our data useful, please do tell your funders that you have used our data and indicators in a certain way, and you would like your partners in other countries also to sort of have the exposure to this data for that country. That will help us expand our data and survey to other countries. Another thing is we are basically inviting human rights experts within India as well to be ambassadors with us, and we will be reaching out to you very shortly. We would like the ambassadors to basically help us reach out to wider networks of human rights practitioners that work at the grassroots or at policy level, to recruit survey respondents for us, and basically to just raise awareness about the existence, availability, and use of Hermi data for your country so that it can reach as many people as possible. For students and new graduates, we offer remote as well as in-person internships. Currently, because of the situations that we are operating in, the borders are locked. We are taking remote interns as well. And we are also developing newer work streams. You would be interested to know that we are creating a separate work stream in terms of child rights in accordance with the Child Rights Convention, the UNCRC. We're also working on women's rights. We're working on indigenous rights and a lot more. We also have developed an independent module on one specific region, that is the Pacific region, which has many small island developing states, which you will be able to find on our website. And we can also share the module with you in the chat box. I will briefly just tell you what next, what is it that we are planning. So firstly, as I mentioned to you, over the next few days, we'll be reaching out to human rights practitioners and experts like yourselves in India to invite them to be ambassadors with us. These ambassadors will be sort of our cultural advisors and our liaison between the potential survey respondents and Hermi. So we are, because you would know the landscape of the human rights sector in India so much better. You would have the networks, you would know people who would make good survey respondents for us to have a credible and a good amount of data in order to process the civil and political rights cause for India. The second thing that would come in sequence would be recruiting potential survey respondents, which we will be doing with the help of ambassadors, who will first reach out to their partners seeking their consent to participate in Hermes survey. And this is just giving you a brief timeline of the survey that we'll be conducting in India. So from December of this year, so starting today, to February, basically the human rights experts who wish to participate in our survey can express their interest and will receive a consent from different Hermes, from either Hermes or ambassadors. The survey goes live for a period between February 2022 and to the end of March 2022 usually. And those human rights experts who consent to participate in our survey will receive a secure online individual one-time link to the survey for them to fill in. Just to note, this link is for yourself and only people who sign the consent form will get it. And the survey will be launched here in the first week of February. So going ahead in the next few months, this is what we plan for India. And we are hoping that over the next few years, because soon after India's UPR, we also have UPR for, I believe, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. So we are trying to sort of build that kind of a network. So India being sort of the biggest country in the region, we want to sort of have this pilot project take off so that Hermes data can be used better and more effectively and vastly within the region. So yeah, this was our presentation. And please do check out the rights tracker that we just showed you. And if you have any questions, I see a lot of them on the chat already. We'll take the questions in the chat first, and then we can come back to you. You can raise your hands and ask questions. Even if you have questions at a later point in time, as we mentioned, please do feel free to write to us. But before we go to the question section, I know this has been a long sort of presentation, so let's take a couple of minutes to stretch out. I will stop my video, mute myself, take a couple of minutes, grab a glass of water if you like, and then we'll come back to the question section.